Okay, the purpose of this video is to show you about making prep for a job, which is the cutting of the rubber, and how it's measured out, weighed, and cut. So the first thing I'm going to show you is what we call a process sheet. It's a sheet of paper right here which shows you what parts you're making, what the mold. Sometimes the molds have a number on them, or I might stamp them with what the part is that they make. This tells the first date that I ever ran the mold, the material that I'm using, the weight of the material that you put in the mold, which in this case is 80 grams. This tells the durometer, what hardness the rubber is, and this is the prep size. And you'll notice I've written a couple different sizes that I've used in doing this. Although basically, because this type of mold is what we call a transfer mold, which I'll explain in a moment, the size isn't really that important. What's important is to get the right weight in grams. This tells the temperature, what the upper platen is, and the lower platen, what that is. The reason for the difference in the temperature in this case, usually you'd say, well, you'd make them both the same, but it has to do with the mold itself and the part that's pushing the rubber into the mold. You don't want it to get too tight in there, and in this particular case I want it to be loose, so the lower part is made out of aluminum, so it's going to expand more, and the upper part is steel, and it'll expand less, particularly at the lower temperature, so you don't have it seizing up or giving you any problems like that. The next thing is where I got the supplier where I got the rubber was from Gold Key, and the cure time, how long I left it in the press, and if there's any post-cure done on the parts. And this tells notes on what I do when I run the mold, which in this case they have a bump of one bump at 15 seconds. I bump the press one time. Now, the other thing you can see here is a scale which we can set. We set this at 0 and this is set at 80. It measures in grams. It's a very accurate scale. And what's done is that the rubber, as it comes from the supplier, it comes in a sheet like this. You cut it to a certain size and you lay it on top there, and it has to be at least 80 grams to fill out the part properly. Now that can vary a little bit from run to run and the pressure you're using on the press and so forth like that. Because this is aluminum mold, we're going to turn the pressure way down on the press. We don't want to push on it very hard at all. Don't worry about it. The rubber will go into the mold. It won't be a problem. So that's how you do it. Just cut them so that they weigh 80 grams at least, and you should make a good part. Now, as far as how you cut the rubber, that is done on a cutting board like this. This particular rubber was cut into strips about 3 inches wide and then cut. Here's one cut about 1 inch wide. I use that for a lot of the diaphragm molds, and I put it in this cutter to cut what we call a prep after you make it into pieces. And I like using the triangular shaped pieces because I think it helps me get the air out, and that's what I use on the diaphragm molds used most of the time. But to get them into triangles like that and to make them even and so that 3 pieces would weigh the right amount on the scale, you have to have a way to control the size a little bit. So to get my angles right, I've placed a protractor on here and made this tape like that and put on there. So I have 2 different angles that I can cut these depending on, just how big the cavity is and what kind of part I'm trying to make. So like to cut this prep, I just lay that strip in there and I go like this to start out and just push down with it like that, and that cuts off the first piece. It may not be exactly the right size, so I set that aside. I'll still use it, but I set it aside. Now, to make the triangle, I'll turn this thing to that angle of that red tape on there, and then I put this edge of the rubber here at what they call the point of sharps, which is where that sharp corner is right there, and that's going to give me my triangle. And then I push down and cut that rubber off. And then flip it over, or like that, and then you can take another cut, Or what I do is I just move it down to this other line instead of flipping the rubber over, so I have two lines on there. That allows me to just do it like that. You want to be real careful of this blade. Just knocking that thing with your knuckle, you'll put a big slice in your finger. So this is probably the most dangerous part of making these rubber parts, or any of my molds that I run. The press itself isn't dangerous because it moves very slow. But this thing for cutting the prep, you wouldn't want to let some little kid do this or something. And the other thing is, when you're using this cutter, you always want to hold your elbow out, so you're putting a little bit of pressure in like this, because this knife blade's always wanting to move out. And there's adjustments on it to keep it square with the cutting surfaces, so the blade, if it's cutting like this or like this, is no good. You want to have it square going down past this metal edge. And a lot of times I might put a little something out here to support the rubber when I'm cutting it into strips. You'll find that could be useful too. But that's how I get the little triangle shapes out of the rubber, right there.